These are all of the granny square wearables I have made over the past, over the past 3 years of crocheting. And today I'm gonna break a rule and hang them up so I can share all of the pieces with you, how I came up with the ideas for them, hopefully give you some inspiration for your future makes. And I'm gonna reveal the one roadblock that I hit that nobody else in the crochet world seems to be talking about. All right, welcome to level 1. 3 months into crocheting, I quickly realized that blankets and coasters were not gonna teach me how to make real crochet clothing. So I went straight for granny squares and made my first sweater without a pattern. I didn't want a square neckline, so my first innovation was born out of necessity. I had no idea what I was doing, but the result instantly made a splash the first time I pressed post. The subtle shape change around the neck was unlike anything that apparently crocheters were used to seeing. And it became the first pattern request that I ever received and happily obliged with. It only takes 16 squares. But this first piece proved that just a simple choice in unconventional joining could unlock real design potential. But what if I added sleeves? Well, so I did. My raw wool beginner piece immediately stretched out in places that I didn't want it to. It wasn't a failure. It was the first loud warning signal that I might have hit a limit as to what this simple structure could actually support. I filed that lesson away, and that's when I saw all of your balaclava makes trending on social media. That influence was the perfect challenge, so I made one. Sans pattern, of course. But I needed a bigger leap. I thought, what if I just went nuts and added zippers? So this is where I stopped thinking about crochet like blankets and started thinking about it like couture. I dissected the garments I was sewing, studied high fashion pieces, and became obsessed with proving that any garment technique could be translated into crochet. And once I started, those experiments escalated fast. I recreated the top of a blouse that I had designed, complete with a functional zipper closure and high collar. And then tackled structure with a Gautier-inspired crochet granny square vest, complete with buckles and faux pocket flaps. The question stopped being if I could do it and started being how long could I force these squares to behave. I added boning to fingerless elbow length gloves. Can you imagine boning in crochet? That required creating special channels to hold the boning. If you ever want a video on the technique, just let me know in the comments. It's an odd one. I free-handed the fingerless glove shape surprisingly easily. A granny square hood soon followed to match, cementing my belief that no garment detail was off limits. It felt like I had unlocked a superpower, so naturally I decided to tackle the one thing that everybody said could only be done with basic rectangles. A pair of granny square shorts. I added patch pockets and an elasticated waistband and inner thigh shaping, a technique that can be difficult to understand in any woven textile. I wore these everywhere. My confidence was sky high. And then my scrap yarn quilt inspired hoodie blew up overnight. It was made of tight, non-stretch, single crochet pieces. I thought that I had mastered structure, but that's where I'd messed up. You see, I just assumed the same rules that I had used to make this pieced together scrap yarn hoodie would apply to granny squares, and they don't. That assumption sent me straight into my next challenge, treating granny squares like their fabric. So for the next 2 pieces, I tightened everything up. Smaller, denser squares, hoping that they would then act like cloth. Disaster. I made a halter top that stretched and gaped the second I put it on. I made an oversized t-shirt. By its second outing, it had sagged into a shapeless tunic dress. I'd hit a wall and I questioned every stitch. It felt pointless. I couldn't stand to look at that t-shirt and I couldn't just like leave it either. So I ripped it apart and I salvaged every square just 2 weeks after finishing it. And then came 6 long, doubt-filled months of trial and error in slowly reshaping it into an asymmetrical sweater. It turned out really well, but it wasn't the victory I was looking for. I had admitted defeat and made peace with the sag, blending the Granny Square's flaws into the design instead of fighting them. But that couldn't be the final answer, could it? I refused to believe that Granny Squares would forever be only useful for blankets, saggy things, and compromise. I just couldn't end there. I kept crocheting. I had tried out some like bobbles and puff stitches. They were sturdy, solid, and fun to look at. And then I had an idea. What if I tried to make a granny square in like a flower shape and I used like a puff stitch to form the petals? The look was really beautiful, but the structure, that was a shock. So I started experimenting. A sturdy puff stitch inside the classic frame of a granny square, smaller hook, tighter puffs, and then it held. It didn't stretch. It stood on its own, and that was it. The missing piece. The first thing I did was grab the pattern for that saggy t-shirt failure and rebuild it with the new square. Same number of squares, but this time it didn't stretch out. No flop, just structure. Everything had been the same except for this one stitch. I was hooked. To push it further, I stitched puffed granny squares into silk organza and made a dress, complete with a very heavy crocheted skirt. Runway ready proof that the theory worked in the most dramatic way possible. And the secret turned out to be simple. Re-engineer the granny square so it behaves more like a sturdier fabric. The more structure you give the square, the more ambitious your garments can become. And I shared the tutorial for the new puffed granny square, but I couldn't stop there. I had to prove it in a real piece and do something that I hadn't been able to before. And you've been looking at the proof this entire time. This t-shirt, it's oversized, structured. It drapes more like a thick fabric, more so than it behaves like crochet. And that's only possible because every single square has been puffed and re-engineered for structure. If granny squares can do all of this, imagine what your versions could look like. If you want to keep experimenting with me, hit subscribe and make sure to sign up for my newsletter for exclusive pattern updates. And next week, I'll be sharing an anti-tutorial, walking you through how I designed this very t-shirt and came up with the pattern for it. Not step-by-step rules, but the design process itself, sharing my decision-making and my thoughts so that you can be empowered to start making your own structured puff granny square garments. I'm Lee. I'll see you next week, and until then, happy crocheting.